Thank you so much. I appreciate all of our panelists' comments. I'm going to begin with General Petraeus and China. The ranking member and I just came from a Gang of Eight meeting concerning the China balloon. General, you and I were having a little bit of discussion about this before. I mean, what's great about your insight is that when you have mission and operational experience, you have institutional experience, you have adversary assessment experience and all uses and understanding of generation of intelligence. So as you look at this, as we all watch on television, this balloon floating across some of our most sensitive military sites in the nation, what does this say to us about China? And how should we react in what, not just that the risk is there, but that China has made a calculation?
Well, indeed, that, as we were discussing, this is what's really most perplexing to me about this whole episode. And it causes you to ask, is there a process in China? Obviously, the U.S. and other countries conduct sensitive activities, military, intelligence, even economic, diplomatic. There's a process. They go to the top. Someone approves it. Is it in line with what is the risk? What would the effects be if this is detected? And here you're going to put a balloon across the continental United States that is enormous, clearly identifiable, go right over our sensitive sites and so forth. Was there a process? Did someone at the very top actually give thumbs up to this? In which case, it calls into question those who are interpreting recent initiatives by China and with the United States, the president's meeting on the margins of the Bali G20 summit, Secretary Yellen's recent meeting with her counterpart, the intended meeting of Secretary Blinken in China, where we were going to produce guardrails and a foundation for the relationship and so forth. Clearly, if this went to the top and it was approved, that was not particularly sincere, and that should give us very great pause. But so should the other alternative, which is that there is no process and that there was not a recognition of how sensitive this could be. And again, as I mentioned, this should give us very considerable concern because it reflects a lack of appreciation for the kinds of actions that could result in something quite serious, that could turn what our National Security Advisor correctly has described as a relationship of severe competition into the kind of conflict that all of us obviously want to see deterred.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. I recall being with you when you were the Secretary of the Air Force, calling members to the Pentagon to give them a briefing concerning the threats of China and space. Now that we see China utilizing, apparently on a fairly significant scale, as the reports are coming out daily, as to the use of these balloons and intelligence collecting, as we look to transitioning from a threat of here's this space threat that China is building out, now that they're building out this low, hard to detect craft that also does intelligence collection, how do you see this threat evolving with China?
Well, I expect that our intelligence agencies in the military will be doing technical assessments, not only of what they were seeking to collect, but also of the wreckage now that it's being collected. But I actually think that this there's some things about this that I find confusing and that I think probably this committee should delve into at a classified level. The Chinese have over 700 satellites on orbit. Half of them are intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance satellites. What were they thinking? What were they seeking to collect that they couldn't collect from low Earth orbit? And like, as General Petraeus said, who approved this and why? What did they intend? And did they predict correctly what our response would be? Did they understand how we would view this? And if they didn't understand that, what are the implications of that for their future actions? I think those are really important questions. Did they miscalculate? And why? As to what the American response should be. From a technical point of view, we will know probably fairly shortly once they examine the wreckage what the capability of the systems were and how they might be different from what they have on low Earth orbit. But with almost 350 intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance satellites, it makes me wonder, what do they think they could get at 60,000 feet that they're not getting from low Earth orbit? What was their intent? And who approved it? Or are these just programs, as sometimes happens in the United States, that are completely separate from each other? So I think there are a lot of questions that have less to do with our response and more to do with how did China get itself in this position, and did they miscalculate?
Thank you, General Breedlove. I appreciate your comments concerning Russia and Ukraine. And we definitely have gone from the Cold War to strategic cooperation to what is now a hot war. And your insights there are very important. I appreciate your calculation, your assessment that from the intelligence side, we had stopped assessing sufficiently to understand what Russia might do or their capabilities. You mentioned the issue of being slow and providing additional weapon systems and our delay. I'm also concerned about the public debate that we undertake with our allies about new weapon systems being provided and the concern that would be provocative or an escalation. Because that public debate, obviously, Russia hears too. You've had a great deal of experience in looking at Russia and certainly Putin himself. How do you see looking at what we're doing, what should we be doing differently in determining our military support for Russia and how we conduct the diplomacy with our allies?
Well, thank you for the question. And, sir, if I could just to the first part of your question point out that I think even as what we were using to look at Russia came so drastically down, we kept a very strong position on what their nuclear forces were doing. But I do believe we pretty much lost contact with the operational and tactical forces, and that's what gave us so much problem in the first two invasions of Ukraine and also in this third one. So the public debate in being provocative, I think that we have gotten to a place where we are a bit self-deterred. We always have a no answer first, and then thankfully in most cases we work our way around to a yes answer, but what that does is delay the effect for the Ukrainian forces in theater, and that's what I'm talking about, trying to speed this back up. My answer about the being provocative is sometimes seen as a bit over the top, but I just look at Russia has amassed its forces, crossed an internationally recognized border, is invading and occupying a sovereign nation, brutalizing it. They have weaponized rape, they have weaponized torture, they have weaponized murder, and they have exported now, we believe, almost 15,000 children back to Ukraine. I'm typically ask people, when are we going to be provoked with facing this kind of thing? Now, I completely understand the sort of almost childish nature of my response. We do have to be responsible, but I think that we need to examine that we are possibly too self-deterred in our initial responses.
Ms. Gordon, last question. You were obviously involved in policymaking at ODNI and have a great heritage in that. You mentioned cyber. Would you please discuss with us for a second the policy process that has been undergoing with offensive cyber? I'm very concerned that it's not capabilities that are holding us back. It is consideration of policy itself. How do we balance the issues in our debate on offensive cyber capabilities so that we're at least developing them that can help defend us? Ms. Gordon.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a great question. I do think that over the past 5 years, there has been movement towards streamlining the approval process so that it doesn't require every entity to have approval on every action. I think the best example was going against some of the Russian entities looking at the 2020 election and having our forces have the ability to take preemptive action without having to go through the whole community's approval before they took action. And I think there's a good history that we were successful in those. I think two things need to happen now. One is you have to have an outcome in mind. You know, you can't just ask, tell me all the capabilities you have and have them thrown out against some problem. You do have to have an outcome in mind. So what is the goal we are pursuing? And then it's against that backdrop that I believe the community has got to have a much clearer, for want of a better term, map of the nodes that are critical to all the capabilities that will matter. I'll choose just one area in Secretary Wilson's capability. In a contested space environment, I would rather keep it out of space and have us use our capabilities to go after the ground network. So you have to imagine that, task that, and then do the work. And I believe that this is an area where some of the information that we have in the private sector can help us do that mapping of that environment.
Thank you, Rick. Member Himes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the theme I was teasing out in my opening remarks, which is the potential for miscalculation and misinterpretation. I'm haunted by this notion. If you read history, the analogy I would use is that oftentimes there's a whole lot of people putting a whole lot of dynamite into a room. Somebody lays the fuse, and it's often a miscalculation that lights that fuse. I didn't mention in my opening remarks a new thing, which I think other generations didn't face, which is the capability to produce deep fakes, artificial intelligence. We probably got a little taste of that, or we could have gotten a taste of that with respect to the Chinese balloon. Needless to say, all sorts of social media speculation, injudicious speculation on the part of certain members of Congress about whether this could be a platform for the delivery of bioweapons, et cetera. It's not inconceivable that deep fakes would, the next time this happens, actually have Xi in flawless English saying that there are bioweapons aboard, or video, otherwise undetectable, but deep fake video that shows something that would really rile the American population. So my question, I'm going to start with Sue, but General Petraeus, given one of your positions in the past, I'd love to get your take on it too, and if I have more time, I'll move over. But what do we need to do better to understand intentions, to understand internal politics in Beijing and in Moscow, to understand the motives, fears, and objectives of the leaders there, in as much as it matters, understand popular opinion and pressure? I understand there are very real limits to what we can say in open session, but this strikes me as crucial, and so I'd just love to hear your take on all of this. How are we doing, and how could we do better? Ms. Gordon.
So assessment of intention is something that the CIA has been its watchword and is the foundation of human intelligence. And though we don't talk about that as much, that is still an area that they apply aggressively. I think we probably underuse data analysis as a surrogate for understanding intention. Looking at massive amounts of data, not just textual data, but patterns of exercise, patterns of behavior can reveal intent. My example is, I may intend to go up to Annapolis on a beautiful Saturday to sit on Millionaire's Alley and watch the boats go back and forth. If you look at the Easy Pass of mine for the past 5 years, you know that I'm going to go to Costco, go to the gas station, fill up my gas can, and mow my lawn. We are underusing the massive amounts of data that can help us with intention. And then the third thing is we really—
I'm sorry, let me stop you there. Is that a collection problem or an analysis problem? Or both?
Both.
Okay.
Right? We really do need to address this issue of a world of openly available data and what that can allow us to do. That is an analysis problem because the methodology by which you do that has some specificity to it. The third thing I was going to say is we really need to address information disorder and misinformation, as you suggest, not just deep fakes, but actually straight up influence. That has got to be a focus, not just of the intelligence community, but a national focus to work in instant. Specifically in the intelligence community, right now we are flummoxed by deep fakes because they've gotten so good. You could watch a video of me saying almost anything and not know that it's not me. But cross-domain AI, knowing that that can't be said there or then, is a way for us to go against it. So I think there's a lot that can be done with data on all fronts. But this information piece, and then one last thing, I'm sorry to take so long. I actually think your point on miscalculation is not just a technical one, but you didn't ask me about the balloon, but what I would have said is that it's a metaphor for our problem with China. They are massively capable, and they show massive moments of lack of judgment. And what that means is we are sitting on a line where any miscalculation can lead to bad effect. And we have got to sort those things out by any means.
Thank you. Thank you. General Petraeus?
Yeah, it's actually pretty straightforward, at least to explain it, but very difficult to operationalize it. I mean, basically what we need to do is steal secrets and recruit sources, and do it in every domain. Human intelligence, open source intelligence, signals, imagery, cyber, et cetera, and enable all of that better than we have been in the past. A way to
General, let me push you on that because I want
Sure.
to go one level
Yep.
deeper, and then
Sure.
I'll be respectful of my
Sure.
colleagues' time. You were director of CIA. One of the things that's impressed me is that in this world of digital dust, if you have a phone, we know who you are. They know who you are. If you don't have a phone, they know who you are. So go one level deeper for me. How do we solve that problem with respect to human?
Well, I mean, when it comes to human, and now, again, this is an issue that I identified, how do you actually carry out clandestine operations in an era of ubiquitous surveillance? I mean, there are ways of doing this. We just have to resource it more, and it's really worth digging into in very closed sessions with the director of the CIA. I would also ask, again, Director Burns, I think, has taken a very good initiative, both in the digital world, he's pursued this, and then also with respect to the Chinese, established the China Center of Excellence. Ask him, does he have enough humans in that? Are they, and again, remember I talked about investing in human capital. Do we really have the bench of real experts with native Mandarin Chinese, if at all possible, or near to that? And then all of the other capabilities around that for what is, I think, arguably the toughest target in the world. Think about trying to operate, again, in China with the normal tradecraft. When people were running surveillance detection routes of 10 and 12 hours a decade ago, that's before you had a lot of the additional issues of surveillance that have emerged there. So I think you've got to work your way through all of these. Again, it comes back to, again, stealing secrets and recruiting sources in all these areas, and in a very structured and organized way. I think you can actually look at that. And then when you look at a specific target, such as China, you can ask about each of these and see how that is being integrated and brought together in the China Center of Excellence in the CIA in particular.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I'm told that the clocks now work even though they don't work at our spot or necessarily. I believe you guys have one that's visible to you, and we have one for the members that's now to the left. So I ask for everybody's patience. Sorry about the fact that the system's not working, but to bring your attention to it is now going to commence, I believe. Dr. Wenstrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate all your testimonies and you sharing a lot of your expertise with us in the time that we have today. You know, this committee itself brings a lot of experience, as really was mentioned in General Petraeus' opening statement. You know, we have people on this committee that have the experience of actually developing intelligence, and many on this committee that have been on the receiving end, interpreting intelligence and acting upon intelligence. So this is a pretty good mix that we have going into today. And, you know, we're off to a good start, I feel, on this committee we're stressing the importance of the bipartisan work that we can do here and how we must do it that way if we're going to be successful. One of the concerns that I have is not only us coming together as a committee, but our relationship with the intelligence community. And this is a two-way street where trust has to be developed. And sometimes it's lacking. You know, we have a responsibility here to represent not only the American people, but our colleagues in Congress that don't have access to where we are. And we have to sell, for example, the IAA to our other members of Congress when they'll never see it. And so there has to be a lot of trust. And, you know, our colleagues do see things like the FISA report from the IG on FISA, and things start to break down, and we have problems there. You know, and then what I've been able to observe in the military, and then being here and seeing our agencies a lot of times, you know, in the military, we have the UCMJ, where unethical is unlawful. See, in the agencies, it seems that unethical is a little slap on the hand, and, oh, sorry, I shouldn't have done that. So then we couple that with situations where we've been dealing with the IC in this committee, and they tell us they're not going to answer our questions. They're not going to tell us this or that. Well, who has oversight? So how do we go about changing this? Because we might see something now from the IC, and they say they have moderate confidence, and we might say, well, then we have low confidence. Because of this lack of transparency, this lack of cooperation. So I don't know if we need to set rules of engagement, rules of cooperation, but I'd like to direct my question on that and how do we improve this to Dr. Wilson, because you've sat here and you've sat there, and I think that would be helpful if we could hear from you on that.
Thank you, Congressman. There is a responsibility in statute for the administration to keep this committee and your counterpart in the Senate fully and currently informed. Fully and currently informed. Now, at the same time, as members, you have to engender, I mean, there is a gap. You have to engender trust in your seriousness as a committee and also as individual members. It was a very rare time when someone said to the committee or to even individual members, well, we're not going to tell you that. Because it usually got escalated to the chair and the ranking member, and it became a very serious discussion very quickly. And this committee has responsibilities that are different from every other committee in the Congress. You are entrusted with oversight of classified matters. And the American people have to trust you to do your job. That tension between the different branches of government played out in spades in the changes that led up to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act amendments. And it was a pretty tense time. But we got through it, and we're better as a country for it because this committee did its work. So I would encourage you to be serious in your work, but insist on your responsibilities under the Constitution as a separate branch of government.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Yeah, General Petraeus.
You know, it goes both ways. We worked very, very hard to meet our responsibilities that we felt. For example, I met every single month with the Big Four, so now of the House and the Senate, and then also obviously a lot with the Big Four of the HPSCI and the SISI. But beyond that, again, in almost informal sessions, we would do coffees with the SISI and with the HPSCI, closed sessions, and just have back and forth. And it really was, will everyone make themselves available? And we worked very, very hard, again, to meet the requirement that I think that we'd impose for every month to meet individually, by the way, with each of the Big Four, and then to meet with the chairman and the ranking members. We also brought the intelligence Big Four out to the agency on a pretty regular basis. And we tried to, in each case, introduce them to some new element of the agency that they might not have seen before. For example, during my particular time, it was really important that they see the Counterterrorism Center. They'd not seen it, of all things. Introduce them to the Open Source Center, where there was one senior person that actually didn't realize we had an open source center. And so we would have a couple of structured engagements like that out there at Langley. or some other location, and then sit down and have dinner together. And it was all very efficient. And, everybody be out of there by 8 p.m. But if you all can make that possible, I think that is very, very helpful. It's all about, obviously, open communication. And again, we felt a huge responsibility to answer every question that was asked of us.
That's great advice from both of you. I appreciate it. We need to form those relationships. And I think it was another general who once said, we can only move with the speed of trust. So thank you. Yield back.